The Holocaust, the systematic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany and its collaborators, stands as the paradigmatic genocide of the 20th century. Its origins, however, did not begin abruptly with gas chambers or concentration camps. They are deeply embedded in a long and toxic history of European antisemitism, which for centuries had cast Jews as outsiders, Christ killers, and manipulators of finance and culture. This deep-seated prejudice provided fertile ground, but Nazism crucially transformed this religious and social bigotry into a modern, pseudoscientific racial biological ideology. This shift was fundamental. Jews were no longer defined by faith, which could theoretically be changed, but by immutable blood, making them a permanent, existential threat in the Nazi worldview. The appointment of Adolf Hitler as Chancellor in January 1933 was the catalyst that turned extremist ideology into official state doctrine. The Nazi Party's core tenets, outlined in Mein Kampf and party platforms, were now empowered by the mechanisms of a modern state. Central to this was the concept of Volksgemeinschaft, a racially pure people's community from which all perceived alien elements had to be purged. Jews were declared not merely an inferior race, but a parasitic anti-race, Gegenrasse, engaged in a cosmic struggle against the Aryan master race. This Manichaean narrative was instrumental for consolidating the Nazi regime, offering a simplistic, unifying scapegoat for Germany's complex post-World War I troubles: defeat, humiliation, economic depression, and political instability. The first phase of Nazi policy, 1933 to 1939, was characterized by a relentless, legalistic campaign of exclusion and expropriation, incrementally testing domestic and international reaction. The initial, often sporadic, violence of the SA was soon channeled into bureaucratic persecution. The April 1933 boycott of Jewish businesses, the law for the restoration of the professional civil service expelling Jewish officials, and the 1935 Nuremberg racial laws created a comprehensive legal framework for apartheid. The Reich citizenship law defined Jews as mere subjects, while the law for the protection of German blood and honor forbade marriage and sexual relations between Jews and Aryans, aiming to prevent racial pollution. This legal segregation was accompanied by Aryanization, the forced, state-sanctioned transfer of Jewish-owned enterprises and wealth to Aryan hands, pauperizing the Jewish community. The pogrom of November 9th to 10th, 1938, known as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, marked a dramatic and public escalation from economic and social ostracism to orchestrated, nationwide physical violence. Instigated by the state under the pretext of revenge for the assassination of a German diplomat by a Polish Jewish teenager, paramilitaries and civilians destroyed over 1,000 synagogues, ransacked 7,500 businesses, and vandalized homes. Approximately 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and deported to concentration camps like Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen, where many died from brutal treatment. Crucially, the state fined the Jewish community 1 billion Reichsmarks for the damage and accelerated their total economic elimination. This event demonstrated that not only was anti-Jewish violence state-sanctioned, but it was also profitable, and it normalized extreme violence against Jews in plain sight of their non-Jewish neighbors. By September 1939 and the outbreak of World War II, German Jews were isolated, impoverished, stripped of rights, and living in constant terror, a population rendered utterly vulnerable, setting the stage for the radical policies of war. The Nazi invasion of Poland in September 1939 fundamentally and catastrophically transformed the scale and nature of the Jewish question. Overnight, the regime gained control over the largest Jewish population in Europe, approximately 3 million people. This created what Nazi planners saw as a demographic problem of unprecedented magnitude. In the occupied East, Nazi ideology met with even fewer constraints, revealing its most murderous potential from the outset. Here, the concept of Lebensraum, living space, for Germans merged with virulent racial theory. Slavic peoples were deemed Untermenschen, subhumans, fit for slavery or elimination, while Jews were targeted for immediate, extreme violence as the primary racial enemy. The first solution was brutal territorial concentration. The Nazi administration, under figures like SS Chief Heinrich Himmler and Governor-General Hans Frank, ordered the establishment of ghettos in major cities. The largest were in Warsaw, Lodz, and Krakow. These were not merely segregated neighborhoods but hermetically sealed prisons, often walled off, with movement controlled by armed guards. Jews from surrounding regions and from the Reich itself were forcibly relocated into these districts, leading to catastrophic overcrowding, with multiple families crammed into single rooms. The official food ration for Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto was a starvation level 184 calories per day, compared to over 2,600 for Germans. Disease, especially typhus, ravaged the malnourished population. The ghettos served a tripartite function. They isolated Jews from the non-Jewish population, they provided a captive pool of slave labor for German war industries, and they acted as instruments of slow, natural extermination through hunger and disease. The Jewish councils, Judenrat, forced to administer the ghettos on Nazi orders, faced impossible moral dilemmas, balancing cooperation to avoid immediate reprisals against the grim reality of facilitating Nazi control. Parallel to the ghettoization, a campaign of mass murder began immediately with the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. For specially formed mobile killing squads, the Einsatzgruppen followed the Wehrmacht into the Baltic states, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. Their explicit orders were to eliminate communist officials, partisans, and Jews. With assistance from local auxiliaries and sometimes regular army units, they conducted systematic, large-scale shootings. Victims were rounded up, marched to remote locations, forests, ravines, anti-tank ditches, forced to undress, and shot into prepared mass graves. The massacre at Babin Yar near Kiev in late September 1941, where 33,771 Jews were killed in 2 days, is the most infamous single atrocity, but thousands of such sites dot the eastern landscape. By the end of 1941, the Einsatzgruppen had murdered over 500,000 people, primarily Jews. This Holocaust by bullets was psychologically taxing for the killers and logistically messy, prompting the Nazi leadership to seek more efficient and detached methods. The critical shift from sporadic and regional mass murder to a comprehensive, continent-wide plan of annihilation was formalized in the second half of 1941. While no single written Führer order for the Holocaust has been found, historians agree that Hitler verbally authorized the final solution of the Jewish question around this time. This policy was concretized at the Wannsee Conference in Berlin on January 20, 1942. Chaired by SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, senior bureaucrats from key ministries coordinated the logistics for the deportation and murder of all 11 million Jews in Europe, from Ireland to the Urals. The conference minutes, couched in euphemistic language, evacuation, appropriate treatment, marked the moment when the genocide became a coordinated administrative project of the German state, requiring the cooperation of its transportation, economic, and foreign offices. The ghettos of the East were now redesignated as transit points in a vast, deadly bureaucracy. The final solution required an industrial system to match its continental ambition. The result was the creation of a camp universe, with the purpose-built extermination camps Vernichtungslager as its deadly apex. Unlike the vast network of concentration camps, Konzentrationslager like Dachau or Buchenwald, which were primarily for political prisoners, slave labor, and terror, the death camps of Operation Reinhard, Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, and the hybrid camp complex of Auschwitz-Birkenau had mass murder as their central defining function. Located primarily in occupied Poland, they were chosen for their proximity to major Jewish populations and rail lines, yet away from prying eyes. The process at these camps was a chillingly efficient conveyor belt of death. designed to maximize killing speed while psychologically shielding the perpetrators and extracting material value. Upon arrival in overcrowded cattle cars after days-long journeys without food or water, victims underwent a selection on the ramp. At Auschwitz, this duty often fell to SS physicians like Joseph Mengele, who with a flick of the wrist decided immediate life, temporary slave labor, or immediate death. Those deemed unfit, the elderly, children, mothers with small children, the sick, comprised about 70 to 80% of arrivals. They were told they were going to disinfection showers for delousing, a cruel lie to prevent panic and resistance. They were forced to undress, their hair was shorn for industrial use, and they were herded into gas chambers disguised as shower rooms. At Auschwitz, pellets of Zyklon B pesticide were dropped through vents, releasing lethal cyanide gas. Death took 15 to 20 agonizing minutes. In the pure death camps, victims were asphyxiated by engine exhaust fumes. The machinery of murder extended beyond the gas chambers. Special prisoner work units, the Sonderkommandos, were forced to remove bodies, extract gold teeth, cut hair, and operate the crematoria. Their existence was a temporary, living hell. They were periodically murdered themselves to erase witnesses. The plunder was systematic. Clothes, shoes, luggage, eyeglasses, and even ashes, used as fertilizer, were recycled for the German war effort. This demonstrated that the genocide was not only ideological but also economically exploitative to its horrific conclusion. This entire system was powered not by sadism alone, but by the cold, amoral logic of modern bureaucracy and private enterprise. The German National Railway, Reichsbahn, meticulously scheduled train timetables, charging per head per kilometer for the deportations. Major industrial firms like IG Farben, which built a synthetic rubber plant at Auschwitz-Tremanowitz, and Siemens eagerly used slave labor, with workers literally worked to death. Bureaucrats in ministries drafted memos about train allocations and the distribution of confiscated property. This division of labor, where one official arranged train cars, another designed efficient ovens, and a third managed the budget, created a society of desk-bound accomplices. The Holocaust thus stands as a terrifying testament to how advanced technology, rational bureaucracy, and corporate complicity can be harnessed to commit atrocities on an industrial scale, with perpetrators often distanced from the direct, visceral horror of their actions. The liberation of the Nazi camps in 1944 to 1945 by advancing Allied and Soviet forces was an encounter with a reality that defied comprehension. Soldiers, hardened by war, were utterly unprepared for the scenes they witnessed. Mountains of emaciated corpses, living skeletons barely clinging to life, the stench of death and disease, and the hollow, haunted eyes of survivors. These liberators, whether American troops at Buchenwald and Dachau, British at Bergen-Belsen, or Soviet soldiers at Auschwitz and Majdanek, became the first external witnesses to the full, horrific truth. Their film footage, photographs, and testimonies provided irrefutable evidence that shocked the world and seared the imagery of the Holocaust into global consciousness. For the survivors, known in Hebrew as She'eret Hapelta, the surviving remnant, liberation was the beginning of a long, fraught journey, not an end. They faced the immense physical challenge of recovery from starvation and disease, compounded by the psychological trauma of what they had endured and witnessed. Most confronted the devastating realization that their entire families and communities had been obliterated, a loss that created a profound absence of absence. Their return home was often met with persistent anti-Semitism, property disputes, and even violence, as in the Kielce pogrom in Poland, 1946. Hundreds of thousands became displaced persons, DPs, living in camps administered by Allied authorities, where they slowly rebuilt lives, formed new families, and waited, often for years, for opportunities to emigrate to Palestine, the United States, or elsewhere. The international response to these crimes was the groundbreaking Nuremberg trials, 1945 to 1949. The International Military Tribunal prosecuted major war criminals for crimes against peace, war crimes, and, innovatively, crimes against humanity, atrocities committed against civilian populations. Subsequent trials, like the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem 1961, further dissected the bureaucratic machinery of genocide. These legal processes established crucial principles of individual accountability for state actions, rejecting the defense of just following orders. The moral imperative born from the Holocaust directly fueled the drafting of the 1948 UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, framing a new international order based on human dignity. The memory and historiography of the Holocaust have evolved significantly. In the early post-war decades, it was often subsumed within broader narratives of World War II or national suffering. The 1960s and 1970s, marked by the Eichmann trial and the TV series Holocaust, saw a shift towards centering Jewish victimhood and survivor testimony. The establishment of major memorials and research institutes, Yad Vashem, 1953, U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, 1993, alongside educational curricula worldwide, has institutionalized remembrance. International Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27th, commemorates the liberation of Auschwitz. Today, the Holocaust serves as the ultimate historical warning sign, a negative moral compass. Its lessons are multifaceted. It demonstrates the catastrophic end result of unchecked anti-Semitism, racism, and xenophobia. It highlights the danger of propaganda and the erosion of democratic norms and truth. It shows the catastrophic consequences of bystander apathy and the international community's failure to act. And it reveals how modern states and technologies can be perverted for genocide. In an age of rising nationalism, hate speech, and genocide denial, its memory is an urgent call to vigilance, to defend democratic institutions, to protect minority rights, and to recognize our shared responsibility to prevent such evil. It is a past we are obligated to keep actively present, not as a static monument, but as a living lesson in the perpetual struggle for a more just and humane world.